Hello, welcome to part 2 of our first meeting together. Now we're going to talk about what national governments do in order to maintain order, in order to organize people. And national governments do a lot of different things, depending on which country you're talking about, but they all have one thing in common, and that is that national governments seek to exist. They seek to continue their own existence. And if we understand this basic premise, then you can understand all of the things that national governments do, because they do all of these different things in order to exist. So, for example, number one, national governments create rules of conduct. We call these laws. Laws are that basic ingredient that's used to organize people. Remember how in our last discussion we said that governments are methods for organizing people? Well, laws are that ingredient that's used to organize us. So the people who are governed are legally bound to do certain things like pay taxes, and we are legally prohibited from doing certain things, like, say, robbing a bank. So when it comes to governments creating laws, there are certain things that laws say that the people have to do, and certain laws that say these are things that the people must never do or must not do. So that's the first thing that governments do. The second thing that governments do is they use coercion in order to enforce the laws that they make. Governments use physical coercion. In other words, if you break a law and are convicted of breaking that law, you can go to prison. Governments can also use economic coercion. In other words, they can force you to pay a fine if you are convicted of breaking certain laws. Number three, governments defend themselves against threats. Governments defend themselves against domestic threats, or threats that happen inside the country, like crime or terrorism or revolution. And governments also defend themselves against foreign threats, threats that exist outside of the country, things like invasion or international terrorism. Number four, in order to continue to exist, governments reward positive behavior. They reward positive behavior by doing things like giving tax breaks for people or companies who employ other citizens. If you can have your citizens employed, that creates stability in your system. And if you have stability in your system, that's one of the keys to that system existing. So it makes perfect sense that if a government's goal is to continue to exist, that it would want to do everything that it can to create stability. So remember, we're still on number 4 here when I said that governments reward positive behavior. Governments also support academic achievement because good students usually become good citizens. Governments also support scientific research because scientific research can be very helpful in the goal of a government existing. Scientific research leads to things like the cure for diseases. It leads to things like better technologies. So governments reward positive behavior, and the reason that they reward positive behavior is because it helps them to exist. Number 5, governments discourage negative behavior. Governments, for example, punish violent and property crime. And government also taxes unhealthy behavior like smoking or drinking or gambling. In the United States, we pay a really high tax on cigarettes. We also pay a really high tax on any winnings that you get in gambling. The reason that this is that governments, without saying that you can't do these things, want to discourage them as much as possible. Why would this be? Well, if too many people got ill from smoking, or too many people lost all of their money in gambling, this would create instability in the society. And remember, government wants to create stability because stability helps governments in existing. And then finally, number 6, governments create and encourage tradition. All governments have some type of origin stories about founding fathers who created their constitution. This isn't unique to the United States. All governments have these types of stories. All governments have official anthems, they have flags, they have seals, they have national holidays, and all of these things are done to encourage patriotism. And why would a government want to encourage patriotism? Well, it helps us to feel as though we're part of something larger, something that makes us unique, and it makes us willing sometimes to die for our country. If a country has a number of people who are willing to stand up and defend that country, well, then that certainly helps that country to exist. And remember, we said the goal of national governments is to continue to exist. Talk to you next time.